The rain over Chicago wasn't just weather, it was an accusation. It fell in hard, angry sheets against the plate glass windows of the 80th floor, blurring the billion-dollar skyline into a watercolor of bleeding neon. Inside the war room of Thorne Global Logistics, the only sound was the rhythmic thrum of that rain and the quiet digital hum of a company in cardiac arrest. Marcus Thorne, 56 years old and the architect of this empire, stood with his back to the room, watching his own reflection superimposed over the chaos of the city. He saw the face of his father, a longshoreman who had spent 40 years hauling cargo for other men, a face etched with coal dust and exhaustion. "Never let them see you bleed, son," his father had told him the day Marcus opened his first office with one leased truck and a folding table. Now, Marcus was hemorrhaging. He wasn't just bleeding, he was dying on the vine, and the men he paid millions to staunch the wound were standing behind him, holding gauze and offering excuses. On the massive, wall-sized holographic display, the number wasn't just red. It was a deep, arterial crimson, a stain that pulsed with every refresh of the data. It read $487,200,000. That was the variance, the black hole, the drain. It was nearly $500 million in operational losses that had materialized over the last 6 quarters, an amount so vast it defied explanation. It was the kind of number that bankrupted companies, erased legacies, and sent titans like him plummeting back to earth. "Explain it again, Ethan," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet, not turning from the window. The reflection showed Ethan Vance, his head of operations, shifting his weight. Ethan was everything Marcus was not. Polished, Ivy League, a man who spoke in algorithms and managed by spreadsheet. He was the future Marcus had been told he needed to buy. "Marcus, as I've briefed, the macro-environmental factors are unprecedented," Ethan began, his voice smooth, practiced, the sound of sterile confidence. "Fuel spikes are averaging 32% above projections. The driver shortages in the Midwest corridor are forcing us into critical overtime payouts, running us nearly 40% over budget on salaries alone. We have maintenance bottlenecks in 3 key states, and the new emissions regulations." Marcus turned, his eyes like ice. "Macro? You think this is macro, Ethan? This is a hole in the bottom of my ship. This is a $500 million hole." He strode from the window to the gleaming obsidian conference table, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. "I read your report. Fuel, overtime, regulations. That accounts for what? 50 million? Maybe 80 if you're generous." He slammed his hand flat on the table, the impact making the holographic display flicker. "Where is the other $400 million, Ethan? Variables don't account for that. Inefficiency doesn't account for that. That isn't a leak. That is a drain. It's a sinkhole. It's theft. And it's happening right under your nose, on your watch, in my house." Ethan's jaw tightened, a flicker of resentment in his eyes before he smoothed it over with professional concern. He despised when Marcus got elemental. This was a data problem, not a dock workers' brawl. "Marcus, I understand the frustration," Ethan said, adjusting his cuffs. "I am just as concerned. I am initiating a full, top-to-bottom audit, bringing in an outside firm. They'll trace every—" "No," Marcus cut him off. "No outside firms. They'll leak it to the press, and our stock will be in the toilet before we even find the problem. You will handle this. You and your team. You will rip the floorboards out of every truck. You will audit every fuel card, and you will read every single line of code in your logistics software. Find the drain, or I'll find a new head of operations who will." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. Ethan Vance, the man who prided himself on unflappable control, simply nodded. "Of course, Marcus, I'm already on it." Marcus turned back to the window, dismissing him. "Get out. I need to think." As Ethan left, his face a mask of compliance, Marcus felt a deep, primal fear. He was surrounded by the best minds money could buy, and he had never felt more alone. 20 floors below, in the echoing concrete canyon of the Thorn Global loading docks, Keisha Washington was trying to disappear. At 27 years old and 8 months pregnant, disappearing was a cruel joke. The wind tunnel created by the skyscrapers was brutal, whipping her thin jacket against her skin, a damp, skeletal cold that seemed to find every gap in her clothing. But the deep overhang of Dock 7, nestled between the compressors and a stack of forgotten pallets, offered a shield from the worst of the driving rain. She had been sleeping here between the 2 a.m. departures and the 4 a.m. arrivals for 3 weeks. The baby kicked a hard, demanding jab under her ribs, a constant living reminder of her deadline. I know, little one," she whispered, shifting her weight, the concrete unforgiving against her hip. "Soon." But soon was a terrifying concept. Soon was a hospital with no insurance. Soon was a baby with no home. Keisha clutched a worn, damp, warped spiral notebook to her chest, the pen tied to it with a piece of string. This notebook was her last grip on the woman she used to be. It was the only thing that hadn't been stolen or pawned. Inside, the pages were filled not with diary entries, but with columns of numbers, license plates, departure times, and driver names. Keisha wasn't just sheltering, she was auditing. She couldn't help it. It was the only thing that kept her mind sharp, the only thing that kept the panic at bay. She was an exile from this world, but she still spoke the language. She used to design logistics software. She used to dream of working in the very tower that now, ironically, offered her its refuse as shelter. She had been framed, blacklisted, and discarded by an industry she had loved. All it took was one signature, one accusation from her old boss, a man named Ethan Vance. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. For days, she had watched the trucks, driven by the instinct that something was profoundly wrong. It was the only puzzle she had left to solve. And tonight, under the flickering halogen lamps of the dock, she saw it. The lie. It was almost arrogant in its sloppiness. Her eyes were fixed on Truck 114, a late-model Kenworth idling at the gate, its engine a low thrum against the rain. The digital manifest on the driver's terminal, visible from her hiding spot, read, LTL Cargo, Household Goods, 18,000 lbs, Dest, Milwaukee. But Keisha knew trucks. She had built the algorithms that calculated weight distribution. And she could see the suspension. The tires were bulging, the frame was sitting low on its axles, groaning under a weight far exceeding its manifest. "That's not 18,000 pounds, she murmured, her pen flying across the page. "That's 40,000. Easy." She flipped back in her notes. Truck 114, always 114, and always driven by the same man, a driver named J. Rourke. And Rourke had a pattern. He always logged a 90-minute mandatory maintenance stop in Gary, Indiana. But Keisha knew the Thorn network map. The Gary facility wasn't a repair hub. It was a cross-dock, a simple transfer station. No heavy repair bays, no parts inventory. The numbers didn't just not add up. They spat in the face of logic. The glass doors to the dock slid open with an expensive hiss, slicing through the rhythm of the rain. Marcus Thorn stepped out, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. He was fleeing the sterile excuses of his boardroom, needing air, needing to see the steel and the diesel, the real parts of his business. He was about to turn back when he saw her, a shadow detaching itself from the other shadows. His first instinct was security. His second, seeing the notebook in her hand, was suspicion. Was this corporate espionage? A reporter? "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice echoing sharp as a piece of broken glass. Are you getting paid to watch my trucks? Are you with the press? Keisha scrambled to her feet, a painful, awkward movement, clutching the notebook to her chest. She was terrified. She had been rousted by security twice this week, and the police were always a looming threat. No, sir, I was just getting out of the rain. Marcus strode closer, his eyes missing nothing, the advanced pregnancy, the torn shoes, the exhaustion, but it was the notebook he fixed on. What are you writing? He demanded, pointing at it. What are those numbers? Keisha looked at the trucks, then at the billionaire who owned them. She was cold, she was hungry, and she was tired of being invisible. What did she have left to lose? The fear was suddenly eclipsed by a different emotion, the pure intellectual offense at the inefficiency she was witnessing. It's wrong, she said, her voice rough from disuse. Marcus froze. What's wrong? She pointed with a shaking finger, not at him, but at truck 114, now pulling out of the gate. That truck, its manifest says it's 18,000 pounds bound for Milwaukee. It's not. It's carrying at least 40,000, probably premium cargo, and it's not going to Milwaukee. Marcus stared at her. How in the hell would you know that? By the suspension, Keisha said, tapping her notebook. And by the logs. Your driver, Rourke, is going to log a 90-minute maintenance stop in Gary. But your Gary terminal is a cross-dock. No R&M bays. He's not stopping for repairs. He's stopping to offload. You're running a ghost fleet, Mr. Thorne, a shadow network, and it's bleeding you dry. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the rain. Marcus looked at this woman, pregnant, homeless, clutching a 5-cent notebook, and she had just articulated the $500 million truth that his entire data team had missed. He didn't get to be a billionaire by ignoring genius, no matter how it was packaged. He made a decision. Come with me. Keisha flinched. I'm not doing anything wrong. You're about to do something very right, Marcus said, his voice no longer harsh but intense. Come with me. He didn't just let her in the side door, he badged her through the gleaming, cathedral-like main lobby, past the marble floors and the massive abstract sculpture of a turbine. The night shift security guard at the main desk started to rise, his eyes wide, but Marcus silenced him with a look. He led her into the private executive elevator, the one that smelled of old leather and new money. Keisha caught her reflection in the polished chrome doors. She saw a ghost, her hair matted, her face smudged with grime, standing next to the most powerful man in Chicago. She felt like an alien, a creature from a different, dirtier planet. The elevator chimed softly, opening directly onto the 80th floor. An assistant at a late-night desk looked up, her mouth falling open as Marcus Thorne brushed past her, this bedraggled woman in his wake. He led her straight back into the war room. Ethan Vance was still there, standing by the console, typing furiously into a tablet, no doubt already crafting his CYA emails. He looked up, his face a mask of confusion and undisguised contempt, as Keisha entered. "Marcus," Ethan said, his voice laced with disbelief. "What is this? This is a secure floor." Marcus ignored him, his entire focus on Keisha. He guided her to the main console, the holographic display still pulsing that sickening crimson. She was trembling, overwhelmed by the light, the warmth, the sheer data surrounding her. "You," Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. "You see the numbers. Now show me. Show me on the screen." Keisha's hands, shaking from cold and fear, reached out. She touched the screen. The data swirled, but as her fingers moved, the fear began to fade, replaced by the familiar electric adrenaline of the puzzle. This was her world. She knew this language. "They aren't just stealing cargo," she whispered, her fingers flying, pulling up manifests and cross-referencing GPS logs from memory. The system was fast, and she was faster. "They're running phantom routes. Rourke isn't the only one. There are 12 others." She isolated the trucks, their routes flashing on the map. They log a delivery in Des Moines, but the GPS shows them diverting for 2 hours to this location, an unregistered warehouse in Joliet. They're offloading your premium cargo, electronics, pharmaceuticals, whatever they can sell. But the weigh-ins, Ethan scoffed, trying to regain control. The return weights match the logs. We checked that. Of course they do, Keisha said, not even looking at him. Because after they offload the stolen goods, they drive 10 miles to a quarry. She pulled up a satellite image. And they fill the empty trucks with gravel for the return weigh-in, dumping it before they hit the final checkpoint. The fuel costs aren't high because of the market, Mr. Thorne. They're high because your trucks are running twice the routes, half of them for your competitor, and they're running heavy both ways. She finally turned, pointing to the $487,200,000 number. That's not a loss. That's a price. That's what your stolen inventory's worth on the open market. She didn't just find the leak. She had found the $500 million drain. Ethan Vance was sheet white. He wasn't just incompetent. He was presiding over the largest internal theft in logistics history. Marcus Thorne looked at the data, now rearranged into a clear, damning narrative. Then he looked at Keisha, who was leaning heavily on the console, exhausted but triumphant. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice raw. "Keisha," she panted, a hand on her stomach. "Keisha Washington." Marcus nodded slowly, a new, dangerous energy in his eyes. "Ms. Washington, you just saved my company. Now, let's talk about what I can do for you." Ethan Vance opened his mouth, a torrent of denials and corporate jargon ready to spill. But Marcus Thorne held up a single finger, silencing him. "Ethan," Marcus said, his voice lethally calm, "go to my personal study. Not your team office, mine, the one with the oak walls. Sit in that chair, and do not touch the phone, do not touch your computer, and do not speak to anyone until I come for you. Are we clear?" The order was so specific, so chilling, that it shattered Ethan's composure. He was no longer an executive, he was a suspect. He gave a short, sharp nod and walked out of the room, his hurried footsteps echoing on the marble. The silence he left behind was heavy. Marcus then turned to Keisha. The adrenaline that had held her upright now abandoned her. She swayed, her hands trembling violently, and she grabbed the console to steady herself. She had just faced down two of the most powerful men in the city, and now the reality of her hunger, her exhaustion, and her pregnancy hit her like a wave. Marcus saw the color drain from her face. "Sit," he commanded, but his voice was different. The harshness was gone. He guided her into one of the $20,000 leather chairs, and she sank into it. "Assistant," he barked into the intercom, "get a hot turkey club sandwich, French fries, and 3 bottles of water in the war room. Now." He looked at Keisha. "When was the last time you ate?" Keisha looked down at her own soiled hands. "Yesterday morning," she whispered. "Half a bagel from a dumpster." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his throat. It wasn't pity, it was a caustic, burning rage. He had allowed this level of cruelty to exist in his own ecosystem. When the food arrived, Keisha ate with a desperate ferocity that was painful to watch. She ate as if the food would be taken away, and Marcus just stood there, silent, watching the woman who had just saved his empire devour a basic sandwich like it was a feast. When she finished, she wiped her mouth on the back of her hand, a flicker of shame in her eyes, but she didn't apologize. She was past apologies. "Better?" Marcus asked. She nodded, drinking the water. "Now tell me," he said, sitting across from her, "how you ended up on my loading dock, Ms. Washington, and how you know Ethan Vance." Keisha took a deep breath, the warmth of the food giving her a momentary strength. The story spilled out of her, not in a sob, but in a controlled damage report. "I don't just know him. He was my boss. I was a senior logistics analyst at Freightmark 2 years ago. I was their best. She glanced at the data screen. I designed the dynamic routing system they use. I was good at it. I loved it. I loved finding the patterns, finding the inefficiencies. She paused, her hand instinctively going to her belly. I found an anomaly. A lot like this one, but smaller. A few trucks, a few missing manifests, a fuel route that didn't make sense. I compiled the data, built an entire presentation. I honestly thought I was getting promoted. A bitter smile touched her lips. I showed it all to Ethan. He told me it was genius-level work and that he would handle it personally. The next day, he called me into his office. HR was there. My report was on the table, but he'd altered it. He had inserted faked, backdated emails from my account to a shell company he'd created himself. He used my own report as proof that I was running the scam. He told me, "Keisha, you're brilliant, but you're sloppy, and now you're a liability." Keisha's face hardened at the memory. Security walked me out. They didn't even let me get my jacket. They handed me my things in a cardboard box in the lobby, in front of everyone. Marcus listened, his face like stone. "And he blacklisted me," Keisha continued, her voice thickening. "Everywhere I applied, the door was shut. Unstable, a security risk, unreliable. Ethan Vance was a rising star in the industry. His word was gospel. Nobody wanted to hire the thief he'd bravely exposed. I burned through my savings trying to pay for lawyers, but the case was his word against mine. And he was him, and I was me." "And the father?" Marcus asked quietly. Keisha laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "He loved my energy. He loved my drive. But he didn't love it when my drive got me fired and broke. When I told him I was pregnant, he said he couldn't handle the drama. He said I had ruined my life and he wasn't going to let me ruin his. He was gone in a week." The tears came now, silent and hot. I called my mom. I told her I needed to come home. She was so ashamed. "People don't just get fired for nothing, Keisha," she said. "What did you really do?" She sent me $200 and told me not to call again, that I'd brought shame on them. And then the money ran out. The shelters were full, and your loading dock was dry and out of sight, and I still liked watching the trucks. She finished, exhausted, the last of her pride spent. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus Thorne stood up, but he wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with a volcanic fury. "He brought his cancer into my house," Marcus snarled, slamming his fist on the console. "He destroyed you to cover his tracks, and then he had the audacity to bring the same scam into my company. And the universe, in some sick cosmic joke, dropped the only person who could cure it right on my doorstep." He turned to her, a sudden, sharp clarity in his eyes. "Ms. Washington, I can't undo what that man did to you for the last year, but I can damn well make him pay for it, and I can ensure you never spend another night in the cold. I have an offer for you. It's not charity. It's combat pay. I need your brain, and you need my platform." Keisha looked up, confused. "I am creating a new position, effective immediately, Director of Internal Logistics Audits. You will report directly and only to me. You will have full carte blanche. Level 10 access to every file, every server, all data. Your sole job," and here his eyes narrowed, "is to analyze every truck, every manifest, and every digital signature in this company. Your job is to find every single person involved in this drain. You will rip this cancer out by the root. And you will help me put Ethan Vance in a federal prison cell for the rest of his natural life." Keisha was stunned. A job?" "A job," Marcus confirmed, with a six-figure salary, starting at $250,000. A corporate apartment on the Gold Coast with a 2-year lease paid in full, furniture, food, everything. You will have my personal car service to take you anywhere you need to go. And you will have the best prenatal care Chicago has to offer. You're seeing my personal doctor tomorrow morning. You will have everything you need. In return, he leaned in, I want the man who left you in the cold. Tears streamed down Keisha's face, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from a purifying rage. She stood up, slowly, using the table for support. When do I start? Marcus glanced at his watch. You already did. The next week was a blur, a fever dream of a fairy tale. That night, Keisha didn't go to a shelter. She went to a glass-walled condo on the 34th floor overlooking Lake Michigan. The first thing she did was take a shower, a scalding hot one that lasted for an hour, just watching the dirt and the desperation of months circle the drain. She slept in a king-sized bed with 1,000 thread-count sheets and woke up thinking it was all a dream, until a driver named Frank picked her up in a black Mercedes. When she walked onto the 80th floor the next morning, dressed in an expensive maternity suit that Marcus's assistant had provided, the silence was deafening. The data floor, usually a hum of activity, went quiet. People stared. They knew who she was. She was the boss's project. She was the ghost from the docks. They saw her as a pet, a curiosity. Marcus made it official. He called an all-hands meeting of his senior managers. Ethan Vance was there, his eyes bloodshot, but his face impassive. He couldn't be fired. Not yet. You all know Keisha Washington, Marcus announced to the room. She is our new director of internal logistics audits. She has my full authority. If she asks for a file, you get it to her in 5 minutes. If she asks for server access, you grant it. If she even thinks you're hesitating, you're fired. She is untouchable. Welcome to the team, Keisha. It was a coronation and a declaration of war. Marcus gave her a glass office, not in a corner, but in the dead center of the floor, a glass panopticon where everyone could see her, and where she could see everyone, especially Ethan. His office was directly across from hers. The psychological warfare began immediately. Ethan couldn't touch her, but he could try to isolate her. He would walk by her desk with a thin, threatening smile. Settling in okay, Keisha? He'd ask, his voice dripping with false concern. Just make sure you're getting enough rest. Pregnancy can make one unreliable, all those hormones. He was subtle. He would accidentally revoke her system permissions. Oh, how odd. A glitch in the system, Keisha. So sorry. It might take it 48 hours to fix. When that happened, Keisha didn't wait. She walked straight into Marcus's office. He locked me out. Marcus didn't blink. Give me your credentials, he said, and Marcus did. Use my login, full admin access, now. He told other managers she was unstable, that Marcus was just on a guilt trip, that she'd have a breakdown in a week. He was trying to make her a pariah, to make her doubt herself, to make her fail. But Ethan underestimated two things: Keisha's rage and Marcus's support. Marcus stopped leaving at 5 p.m. He stayed late, and his office became the new nerve center. He'd bring her dinner, not sandwiches, but real food from expensive restaurants. And they would talk. Not just about logistics, but about life. He confessed how lonely it was at the top. I am surrounded by yes men who tell me what I want to hear, he admitted one night, staring at the data she'd found. You're the only person who has told me the truth in 5 years. You are worth more than this entire board combined. She, in turn, talked about her fears of being a mother, her fear that even with all this, she was still broken inside. You're not broken, Marcus told her, his eyes fixed on hers. You were forged. Steel doesn't break, it cuts. A deep respect, a silent partnership formed between them in the glow of the computer screens. And then, 2 weeks after her first day, her belly taut and her back aching, she found it. It was 1 a.m. The office was silent, save for the click of her keyboard. She was tracing the payments from the phantom Joliet warehouse. They were going to a shell corporation, as she suspected. Midwest Freight Solutions, registered in Delaware, standard. But she kept digging. She hacked into the Delaware State Incorporation records, the founding charter. And there it was, the founder's attorney signature. It was encrypted, a knot Ethan must have thought was unbreakable. But Keisha recognized it. It was the same encryption algorithm she had designed at Freightmark. She opened her old source code on a personal laptop, found the master key she had embedded, a personal signature, and ran it. The encryption dissolved, and the name appeared, the beneficiary, the sole signatory, Ethan Vance. Her heart hammered. She had him, the money trail, the smoking gun. She opened a new email to Marcus, her heart beating against her ribs. The subject line, "Got him, final proof." She attached the decoded document, the money trail, everything. Her hand was trembling as it hovered over the send button, and that's when it happened. Not a kick, but a deep electric contraction that stole her breath. She gasped, one hand flying to her belly. A gush of warm liquid soaked her chair. Her water had broken. A second contraction, this one an iron fist, hit her, making her cry out. In a blur of pain and triumph, she looked at the screen, at the baby that was coming, and with one last gasping breath, she slammed her finger on the mouse. Click. The email was sent. This is the kind of story that reminds us that your circumstances never define your worth, and that the right opportunity can find you even in the darkest place. If you believe in the power of second chances and finding strength you never knew you had, perhaps you'll consider joining our community by subscribing. We're trying to build a place for stories that matter. The email was sent. A second later, she dialed Marcus's direct line, her voice tight with pain. "Marcus," she gasped, "it's done. The proof, it's in your inbox, and the baby is coming, now." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Stay on the line, Keisha, I'm coming, and I'm calling security." He hit his intercom. "Lock down the 80th floor, detain Ethan Vance. Do not let him leave the building." He grabbed his keys and sprinted from his office. But he was too late. Ethan, alerted by an automated trigger the moment Keisha accessed the Midwest Freight Solutions files, had seen the email land. He knew the game was over. As security officers rounded the corner toward his office, he was already in the executive elevator using a high-level override key, heading not for the lobby, but for the roof. He was gone. Marcus cursed when he saw the empty office, but Keisha's muffled cry on the phone brought his focus back. "He doesn't matter, Keisha. You do. I'm here." He scooped her up, all adrenaline and protective instinct, and carried her himself, bypassing the elevator for the emergency stairs to get to his private car. The hospital was a blur of bright lights and sharp, focused commands. Marcus never left her side. He wasn't her boss. He was her partner. He held her hand, breathed with her through the crushing waves of contractions, and shielded her from the fear. He saw the strength in her that he had first glimpsed at the loading dock, the resilience, the refusal to break. And after 6 agonizing hours, a new, powerful cry filled the room. Aaliyah, a perfect, healthy baby girl. As the nurse placed the tiny, bundled child on Keisha's chest, Keisha sobbed, a raw, primal sound of relief and overwhelming love. She looked up at Marcus, his suit jacket gone, his tie loosened, his eyes wet. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it," he said, his voice thick, gently touching the baby's head. But their moment of peace was shattered. Marcus's phone began to vibrate on the table, buzzing with a terrifying intensity. It wasn't one call, it was dozens, the entire board, his logistics floor, His phone lit up with a system-wide code red. He looked at the alert. Keisha. What is Protocol Zero? Keisha's blood ran cold. It's a theoretical kill switch. I designed it at Freightmark. It's a scorched earth command. It reroutes every truck in the fleet to random secure locations. It deletes all active manifests and locks down the entire system. It's meant to be used only in a national emergency or a hostile takeover to paralyze the company before it can be stolen. Marcus's face was pale. He's activated it. Ethan has activated Protocol Zero. He was a fugitive, but he was burning the Empire down on his way out. He was going to bankrupt Marcus in less than 12 hours. The company was blind. Trucks were stopping on highways. Cargo was being lost. The $500 million drain was nothing compared to this. This was the apocalypse. Marcus was ruined. Keisha, weak, her newborn daughter sleeping on her chest, looked at the panic on his face. "Get me your laptop," she said. He plugged it in, and she logged into the Thorn Global mainframe from the hospital bed. Her fingers, slow at first, began to move with purpose. The system was chaos. Ethan had locked everyone out, using credentials he'd built a back door for. "He's smart," Keisha murmured, tracing the code. "He's routed the command through the old Gary, Indiana, terminal mainframe. He knows I know that system. He's trying to taunt me." Marcus was on the phone, trying to calm a screaming board member. "Just give me 1 hour," he yelled. "He thinks he's using the system I built," Keisha whispered, her eyes glowing with ferocious intensity. "But I built the kill switch. And I also built the master key." She navigated to a deep, archaic partition of the code, a signature she had embedded years ago, one Ethan never knew existed. She entered her old employee ID from Freightmark. The system unlocked. "He locked the front door," Keisha said, "but he forgot I built the house." With a series of keystrokes, she isolated Ethan's zombie command, severed its connection to the mainframe, and activated the system-wide reboot. On the massive screen in the war room 80 floors up, the red alerts vanished. The map, once chaotic, began to repopulate. The trucks were finding their routes. The manifests were restored from a secure backup. She had done it. From a hospital bed holding her child, Keisha Washington had saved Thorn Global Logistics for the second time. The digital trail from Protocol Zero was a beacon, and the FBI, directed by Marcus, found Ethan Vance 2 hours later, drinking in a motel bar, watching the news, expecting to see the collapse of an empire. Instead, he saw nothing. His plan had simply failed. "Divert Chicago 115 to the Columbus hub. We need to beat the storm front," Keisha said, her voice clear and authoritative. She was no longer the director of audits. She was the chief operating officer of Thorn Global. The door opened, and Marcus walked in, not as the CEO, but as a partner. He was holding the hand of a small toddler with bright, curious eyes who was taking wobbly steps. "Aaliyah," Keisha smiled, kneeling to scoop up her daughter. Aaliyah giggled and hugged her mother. Marcus came up behind them, placing his hands on Keisha's shoulders. They stood together, a family, looking out the window. They weren't just looking at the city, they were looking at the fleet of trucks moving below, a fleet they had saved, a future they had built. Keisha had walked in from the cold, and instead of just finding shelter, she had rebuilt the entire house. If Keisha's journey touched your heart, if you believe everyone deserves a chance to rewrite their story, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. We aren't just here to tell stories. We're here to feel them together. We all have a story about a time when we were underestimated, a time when someone looked at us and saw only our circumstances and not our potential. We would love for you to share your own story in the comments. What did you learn from Keisha's resilience? Did you enjoy today's video? Your feedback is the light that guides our next tale. Thank you for watching.